As a follow-up to Dr. Peterson's lecture, I'd like to make a few additional points on the culture concept in anthropology. I also want to discuss how we do cultural anthropology. First, how we undertake fieldwork. Second, how we write descriptive and analytical accounts of culture called ethnographies. And third, how we use ethnography to address broader theoretical questions. Here I am in the field in northeastern Gabon, Africa, undertaking an interview with a Gabonese elder who'd worked on a nearby proposed iron mine site. This site was originally developed by an American steel company, but never put into operation. I was interested in the way locals viewed this site in relation to their marginalization in the global economy. I also wanted to know how they saw the potential development of this rainforest region. Let me make a few additional points about the culture concept, a central concept in anthropology and in this course. You may be able to use some of these ideas in your upcoming ethnographic assignments. Because the subject matter of cultural anthropology is so vast, there's no easy way to summarize what cultural anthropologists do, but here are a couple of definitions. Many cultural anthropologists approach culture and human cultural practices from a scientific perspective. Here is a scientific definition of cultural anthropology. Cultural anthropology is the description and explanation of the similarities and differences in thought and behavior among groups of humans. This definition emphasizes the scientific approach to cultural anthropology, meaning that it treats information as a test of explanations of cultural phenomena in terms of general principles. Other anthropologists approach culture from a more humanistic perspective. From a humanistic perspective, cultural anthropology is the interpretation and appreciation of other people's ways of life. Humanistic cultural anthropologists strive to understand, engage with, and sometimes celebrate, defend, or protect another way of life rather than to explain it scientifically. Now let's turn to a few additional definitions of culture. Again, there's considerable variation in the ways cultural anthropologists have approached the culture concept, but also substantial underlying commonalities. Edward Burnett Tylor, who taught at Oxford University in England, was a founder of academic anthropology. He defined culture as that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, law, morals, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. This definition, although dated, is still widely cited. A key aspect of this definition is that culture is a complex whole, which suggests that we must conceive of it holistically. At the same time, we acquire or learn by being members of a particular society. Contemporary anthropologist Eric Lassiter defines culture as a shared and negotiated system of meaning. He also sees culture as the lens through which we all view the world. For Lassiter, culture is shared but also generates our differences. Douglas Rogers of Yale University defines culture as the set of meanings, thoughts, and behaviors by which human beings relate to each other and to the world around them. Rogers makes a number of important points about how culture both unites and divides us. All human beings have culture, but particular cultures are shaped by membership in nations, genders, ethnic groups, classes, and other social groups to which we belong. The shared meanings of specific groups lead to important cultural differences between groups. According to Rogers, cultural anthropologists seek to understand the similarities and differences that unite and divide humans as makers of culture. One simplified way that cultural anthropologists have approached cultures as complex wholes can be represented in a pie chart model. Using Western or Edic categories, anthropologists have divided culture into a number of interconnected fields, including ecology, economy, kinship, gender, politics, law, religion, and worldview. When we seek to describe a particular culture or society, we sketch out each of these systems and then show how they operate and how they're interconnected. Most introductory textbooks in anthropology are organized in this way, with individual chapters on each of these fields. This course is also partly organized in this way, with modules on economy, politics and law, kinship, and religion, for example. Another way to approach culture is to focus on different dimensions of human cultural life. David Haynes outlines three key approaches anthropologists have taken. First, materialism, which focuses on adaptation to the environment, as well as technology, material production, and how access to resources generates inequality. Second, social structure or systems. In the 20th century and even today, many anthropologists focused on social structure or social organization. They've sought to understand and explain how human social groups, from tiny kin-based groups in villages to empires and global organizations, are organized and how they operate. Many anthropologists also focus on cultures as systems of meaning. They tend to focus on the emic perspective and seek to interpret how human beings, as members of particular cultural groups, use language, symbols, and ritual to create meaningful lives. In this course, we'll look at culture from all three of these perspectives. In fact, the core units of the course are organized around materialism in the global economy, social organization, and systems of meaning. Today, many anthropologists take a holistic approach by approaching culture from all three vantage points. Let me give you just one example of how anthropologists combine materialist, social, and interpretive or meaning-centered approaches. Anthropologist Beth Bugenhagen has studied Muslim families in Dakar, Senegal. From a materialist perspective, she's interested in how global migration, primarily for economic reasons, is impacting economic life in Dakar. In particular, she looks at how families in the Senegalese capital have been changed by sending their sons and increasingly their daughters abroad. With some of the funds that emigrants send back home, women invest in expensive clothes that shape the women's networks they belong to, while also expressing what it means to be women in contemporary Senegal. Emigrants also send money to Muslim clerics who invest these funds in Quranic schools, mosques, and religious rituals, thereby reaffirming the meaning of Islam in global Senegal. Let's return to the culture concept for a moment. Culture is not only about complex wholes, the very culture concept itself is complex. First, culture is shared but also contradictory. What I mean by this is that in any culture, people differ and disagree on what the fundamental values are. In the U.S., for example, we're deeply divided on such issues as whom we should be allowed to marry, whether we should be allowed to end pregnancies, whether we should be able to buy marijuana at the corner store, or whether the wealthiest citizens should pay more taxes. Second, culture is both bounded and open. Anthropologists have often portrayed specific cultures as highly bounded or closed systems. The pie chart model represents culture in this way, and indeed, when you cross the U.S.-Mexico border from El Paso to Juarez, you immediately find yourself in a different cultural world. But at the same time, in the age of globalization, no culture is an island. Culture, people, ideas, goods, and practices are constantly on the move. In this sense, local cultural identities from southwestern Ohio to Syria are shaped by global processes. Third, as already suggested, culture both unites and divides us. By this, I mean not only that different cultural groups are divided, but that cultures are, of course, also divided internally. Yes, culture is ordinary. In the 19th century, British poet and social commentator Matthew Arnold defined culture as the best that has been thought and said. In other words, high culture. Most anthropologists, however, follow Raymond Williams's assertion that culture is ordinary. We can look for culture in everyday practices, such as the fast food industry, drug culture, shopping malls, the suburbs, and so on. And we can find culture not just in the opera house or art museum, but wherever human beings are up to something. Let's turn briefly to what cultural anthropologists do. We'll go into more depth on fieldwork and ethnography in Module 3, but I want to introduce this here, especially given that your first out-of-class writing assignment is designed to get you doing some cultural anthropology on your own. So first, we undertake fieldwork. Second, we write ethnographies, or descriptive and analytical accounts of cultural practices. Third, we engage in anthropological theorizing to address more general concerns about human social and cultural life. This diagram shows that fieldwork, ethnography, and theory are related to one another. When anthropologists enter the field, they do so having studied enough anthropological theory to help them frame questions about cultural life. While in the field, they gather information they'll use to write ethnographic texts about the people they've been studying. They use their ethnography to address more general theoretical questions and seek to produce new theoretical or conceptual insights. According to anthropologist Peter Metcalf, fieldwork entails three basic aspects: long-term residence, language competence, and participant observation. Fieldwork can also be unstructured. By unstructured, we mean that often anthropologists engage in deep hanging out, as one colleague puts it. In other words, we go through the rounds of daily life with people we're studying, but wait to see what unfolds rather than trying to shape events. Often, we refer to fieldwork as ethnographic fieldwork, which means fieldwork with the purpose of writing ethnography. Initial fieldwork is usually for an extended period, often 6 months to 2 years. Because most fieldwork is intensely local, it tends to emphasize local behavior, beliefs, customs, social life, economic activities, politics, and religion, rather than developments at the national and global level, which are harder to see on the ground. At the same time, since cultures are not isolated, ethnographers must investigate the local, regional, national, and global systems of politics, economics, and information that expose villagers and others to external influences. One way to think of ethnographic accounts is as writing culture. As already noted, ethnography sometimes refers to the process of doing ethnographic fieldwork, but here, an ethnography is a written account of a culture or set of cultural practices. Here are just a few examples of ethnographies. Food gathering among hunter-gatherers in Tanzania. Religious practices, illness, and healing in contemporary Gabon. Work and family among Sudanese women in the town of Sennar. And immigrants from Michoacan in Mexico and the American Midwest. Dr. Cameron Hay Rollins is a medical anthropologist who teaches at Miami University. Currently, she's undertaking research on doctors, patients, pain, and suffering in the United States. But originally, she did field research on the Indonesian island of Lombok. Her research resulted in an ethnography on illness and anxiety among impoverished rural Indonesians. Leighton Peterson teaches linguistic anthropology and ethnographic film, also at Miami University. Dr. Peterson has undertaken extensive fieldwork among the Navajo in Arizona. In addition to speaking fluent Navajo, he's also produced a number of ethnographic films. Philippe Bourgois currently teaches anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania. His initial research was on economic inequality and exploitation in Central America, but he's also undertaken extensive research in the U.S. on drug culture, including crack dealers in Spanish Harlem and homeless drug addicts in San Francisco. We'll be reading a short article on his New York-based research. Dr. Humayun Sidki of Miami University has written numerous ethnographic works, particularly on Central and South Asia. Here we see ethnographies on healing and shamanism. He's also written a textbook on theory and cultural anthropology, Perspectives on Culture. Dr. Sidki thus illustrates the important connection between theory and ethnography within anthropology. What do we mean by theory in anthropology? People use ethnography to develop more general conclusions or theories. We also engage the arguments made by other anthropologists based on their field research. Theories in turn motivate new fieldwork. Particular ethnographies tend to ask particular sorts of questions. For example, some anthropologists may ask about the impact of colonialism, globalization, or external domination on particular societies. Let me just give one example of theorizing. French sociologist Émile Durkheim argued that ceremonies or rituals create society or social groups because when people perform rituals, they symbolically worship society. An obvious example might be singing the national anthem before a baseball game. This reminds us that all the fans and players are united in a single national community. We won't spend a lot of time studying theory in this introductory course, but theoretical perspectives will come up in the reading assignments, lectures, and writing assignments. In closing, let me talk about your upcoming ethnographic assignment that you must complete by the end of Unit 1. Already you can apply the three-part fieldwork ethnography theory model we've just discussed to think about this assignment. First, you need to choose an appropriate field site and then get there. You should already be thinking about that. Second, you need to observe and then adequately describe the setting, the people, and the relevant cultural interactions. And third, you don't yet have a lot of anthropological theory under your belts, but you can already discuss the culture concept and try to explain what is going on culturally. Here's another way to think about this three-step process. First, during your fieldwork, you can observe by watching and listening to what's going on around you. In some cases, you may also participate actively in the scene. Second, based on the notes you take, either during or immediately after your fieldwork, you should write a descriptive ethnographic account of what you've observed. During this phase of the writing, I'm asking you to suspend judgment. In other words, to adopt a relativistic perspective. Third, when it comes to theory, I'm asking for some incisive cultural analysis. What's going on culturally? How can you analyze, interpret, and reflect on your fieldwork? That's it for now.